I'm going to attempt to provide some insight, give you 3 professional tips on how to better write a screenplay. Those 3 are, firstly, the difference between plot and story. The second will be how to better write characters, and the third would be how to write better dialogue. The 3 essentials of storytelling on the screen. The first is plot versus story. What is the difference? Well, the difference is the story is what happens in the film. The plot is usually looked at as how it happens. So the plot would be every single detail that occurs in the story, including the ones that are usually thrown in there that are not necessarily essential to the overall outcome. Now, I'm not some screenwriting guru who's going to tell you that you have to have a 3-act structure. I believe that you could have a film that is just as compelling with only 1 act, or perhaps 5 acts. Werner Herzog has spoken about this. He says sometimes my films have 7 acts or 9 acts. So you're not thinking in terms of a linear structure necessarily. But what is really the difference between plot and story? Scorsese talks about this. He says how he would watch Hitchcock films over and over again, and after a while he wouldn't be so interested in the plot. But what he's seeing on screen with the characters and their expressions and the developments are far more interesting to him than what happens from point A to point B and all of the busy work that goes on. I would use The Godfather as an example. The story of The Godfather would be the rise and fall of Michael Corleone from a button-down schoolboy, an Ivy League schoolboy, into a ruthless kingpin who ascends the throne of his father, more or less. And then the plot would be, well, the film opens on his father's wedding day. The film opens on the wedding day of The Godfather in 1945, just after the war, and he has all of these meetings, and it's a red letter day, and they have family rivalries, so the plot is much more drawn out than the story. All of the intricacies are laid out in the plot. Now, with a film, Godard says, I believe every film should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. So think of your script as a blueprint, and you are giving the formula for everything that will happen step by step. Step by step, everything that you do will come true on the screen. But instead of a normal blueprint where you have to follow step 1, step 2, step 3, you can perhaps open the film with the ending. The beginning could reflect the ending, and you could work your way back to the actual ending, like in Pulp Fiction or Citizen Kane. The great example, Citizen Kane, was the film that set this precedent in motion, and you saw films like The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp and Lawrence of Arabia and Raging Bull and a lot of these films, even if they don't start with the ending. There's a theory I like to call the beginning reflects the ending, how your character doesn't necessarily have to go through changes over the course of the story. Perhaps something more insightful than changing is not changing. And the great example I use for that is A Clockwork Orange. But what I will say for all of the films, there is one essential component that every good and well-written screenplay needs, and that's that you need to really write it like a mystery film. You should never give anything away right away, although you need to skip the exposition. Hitchcock says that exposition is a pill that should be sugar-coated. And you need to find a way. You don't have to. Some films can have great expository writing, but the best thing to do, I think, is to find a catalyst and put your character right in the action, and if you have to, work your way back through how he got there. But get on the ground running But you always need to, what I like to call, plant seeds in the story. You need to be planting seeds and planting clues, whether it's in spoken dialogue or the events themselves. Plant seeds that will come to pass. Whatever themes you're trying to sell in your story, or whatever plot points you're trying to move forward, you need to plant things in motion. Things that the characters might not even see their first viewing, but that are nonetheless there. And just for an easy example, I go to Vertigo, where Vertigo, the film, is self-referential in the title, and after James Stewart's accident, his mistress at the time tells him that perhaps he needs another tragedy to happen to him, another shock value, in order to undo his newfound fears. And ultimately, that payoff at the ending of the film, he gets that shock value. And so the tragedy, the genius of the writing, is that he has been cured of one tragedy, but now he has lost the woman that he loves. So that's one example. You think of every film as a mystery. You're planting seeds that could have big significances or small significances, but it's going to click in the mind of the audience or the reader, and they're going to think, oh, this is very smart. So going on now to how to write characters. This is going to be a little bit shorter. You need to have your structure of characters. You need to have the interactions minimal. You shouldn't have a whole lot of characters or a whole lot of settings. You want the plot to revolve around the main players, whether it's a character study and you're revolving around one or two people, or you're revolving around a family like The Godfather or Goodfellas, where the genius lies within the closed circle of the group of people, the gangsters that you're talking about. But every character that you meet along the way should have some significance in changing the perspective, or at least impacting the motivations or the arc of your protagonist, your primary character, or if it's an antagonist. So what do I mean by this? Look at a video game. For those of you that don't play video games, you have to understand that the structure of a video game is normally very linear, and you have boss battles. You get to the end of a level, the end of a section, think of it at the end of an act of a script. Your character is going to encounter something or someone that is going to make a big change. And as you go through the story, you have bigger battles. So you start with the small characters that are giving your character some trouble, smart-mouthing him, putting blockades for him. And as you go through the story, you're going to find the big boss, the final boss battle. And however that changes the story is however it changes the story, whether it's positive or negative. Perhaps instead of thinking of it as boss battles, perhaps these are positive influences. Perhaps the character is very lucky, and it's all about good things happening to him, if you're that predictable. But for characters, every character should have an impact on the other one, or it shouldn't really probably be in the story. And every character necessarily creates some sort of conflict or some sort of virtue for the other one. Which leads me to my final point about dialogue. How to write smart dialogue in a film? Well, you have to think in terms of perhaps your characters are witty, perhaps they are not. You have to think in terms of their sensibilities, their intelligence, their strengths and weaknesses. And characters in the story, unless you're very big on voiceovers, which is not recommended, your characters are going to be saying everything that you're thinking. So everything that a person can think of, the characters in the movie, they don't have a filter. They can get away with saying those things. And this should always be about confrontations. One thing that you say necessitates another, and there's great back and forth in dialogue. Look at Tarantino, or look at Aaron Sorkin, or someone of that nature. So you do need to look at one word at a time when you're writing dialogue, or even descriptions. You need to find the right words, and sometimes that will take a while. but you gotta find the connection with the subject matter that the characters are talking about. I think of, I could use examples from my own writing. I would look at Pulp Fiction. My favorite scene, I think, is when they're washing themselves off and they're changing clothes, and Tarantino and Harvey Keitel, they're laughing at Sam Jackson and Travolta. And Harvey Keitel asks Tarantino, what does he think of them? What do they look like? He says, a couple of dorks. And Sam Jackson looks at him a certain way. He gives him the stink eye, and he says, oh, ha ha ha, they're your clothes, motherfucker. And, that's inconsequential, but every piece of dialogue, you have to work on individually. And there should be some sort of connection between the stimulus and response. And try to be witty as you can. Don't put things in the story that are just about, oh, how is your day? And so I guess I'll be meeting you here, and these kinds of things. Drop hints in subtle ways, visually, would be the best for non-essential clauses in your story. Find ways to use transitions for settings and giving directions and sort of things. But the dialogue should be witty. It should reveal something about the characters' personalities and their struggles, and they're making hell for other people. Well, life is hell, and hell is other people. That's one way to look at it. So everything that you do should matter in the story, unless you're David Lynch. I mean, certain directors, they're able to put things in the story that may or may not make sense. But even looking at Mulholland Drive, for example, it is possible that every single vignette in the story does have something to do with the overall arc of the plot. So the mistake is that people will have great ideas. Some people have no shortage of great ideas, but you're putting ideas that don't belong in the story. You need to be on one track, have a one-track mind, and everything that you end up putting in the story should be used. That's Chekhov's gun. Chekhov in his principle about the gun on the wall. And if you have a gun on the wall, it should be used for something. You're going to use it to kill someone or whatever it might be. So all of the elements of the story have a purpose, and that's where you can go and you can plant the seeds. We may not know what the purpose is. That gun might be on the wall for the whole movie, and you might not notice it, but it's there. And something that has been introduced should be used, which is what most people would tell you about writing. But these are my insights. I'm no guru. I simply tell you what I see from great films and what I've formulated in my own writing based off of the great writers and great films that I've looked at. And I think if you watch films, you don't need to take classes, you need to watch films and learn the sensibilities of writing from the great writers and the great directors. And you can learn from visual storytelling as much as you can learn from literacy. But you do need to read, as Herzog says, you need to read as much as you can about everything, and you need to understand the references, and then you'll be able to put those in your own writing.